book of Hosea, Hosea with an H. It's not Jose as my text to talk thought. So go ahead and turn there. We're going to be in Hosea chapter 1 to begin. And I know last week we didn't give you enough time to get there. So this time I'm going to eat this bowl of grapefruit, which I want to do anyway. And when this is done, then we'll go ahead and start Hosea together. Once again, Hosea chapter 1. So it's at the end of the Old Testament, so if you get to the New Testament, you've gone too far. I saw this thing that Alton Brown recommended, by the way, so I'm trying it, where he puts a little bit of salt on the grapefruit. Yeah, I think it's pretty nice. So if your friend or is still needing help finding it, you can help your friend out. All right. I'll enter those calories in later when I'm not using my phone. But we are in Hosea chapter 1. All right, y'all ready to do a lesson in a thing you've maybe never heard before? Because supposedly some of you guys have never heard the story. We were talking about it actually at camp, just in some random discussion, and I tried to reference it. I think somebody else tried to reference it, and there was this lack of understanding. But I mean, come on, guys. I did it in a lesson one time, like 3 years ago. Like, don't y'all remember every little thing we talk about? But Hosea, for a little background, Hosea is a prophet, and not a prophet in the sense that he was, always predicting the future, that kind of thing. Most of the time, what the prophets would be doing is they would just be communicating a message from God to his people. Maybe they would be talking to the king, or having this speech from the masses or whatever. But sometimes something that prophets would do when they would be communicating their message is they would use like object lessons, illustrations, that type of thing. And what's interesting with Hosea, he ends up using his very life as an illustration, even his marriage as an illustration. And so God is going to put this woman in Hosea's life named Gomer. So let's actually start reading in verse 2 of chapter 1. We're going to read kind of, several places throughout this book. It says, "When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, 'Go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord.' So he married Gomer, the wife of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son." If you're not old enough to know what promiscuous means, that means she slept around. That means she's not faithful to her husband. If you end up reading a lot of the book of Hosea, if you want to read more after our time together, you're going to realize maybe one reason why we haven't done this in Sunday school is because it's a very adult book. It gets very adult really fast. And it's actually kind of shocking, and it's sort of intentionally shocking because the message that God has to communicate is really shocking. So what happens is, even though she was married to Gomer, she did not stop sleeping around. She continues a pattern of unfaithfulness to him. And then chapter 2 is pretty long. I won't read all of chapter 2. But God draws a connection between the covenant, the agreement that he had made between God and God's people, and then the agreement that a husband and wife make together, and to be faithful to one another, and all that. So in both cases, If you're unfaithfulness in your marriage, it's going to be costly. If you are not faithful to God, not walking with Him, it's going to be costly. Turning our backs on Jesus and pursuing other things is going to leave us unsatisfied, broken. There's consequences. If you look at verse 3 of chapter 2 says, "Otherwise I will strip her naked and make her as bare as on the day she was born." So there is this this aspect of, Gomer ended up being exposed for what had happened. And so in the same kind of way, for those of us who are Christians and, we've kind of got Jesus, we got Jesus on Sundays and Wednesdays, and then every other day we got like our side chick of, that other group of friends that you hang out with, or that other stuff that we're really into and we're wilding out, and we know we don't really need to be doing that, but maybe Josh doesn't know, or my youth group doesn't know, or my parents don't know, so it's not a big deal. There is that statement in there of, you're going to be exposed eventually. People find out. The best marketing campaign I've ever seen in my life, there was a billboard back home when I was growing up, that it was actually on 3 billboards in the town, and it was black and white, and it just said, "Your wife knows." So for like a month there was these billboards throughout the town that said, "Your wife knows," and everybody's talking about it, saying like, "Oh man, somebody found out, and they're just gonna absolutely put this person on blast all over town on this billboard." And then about a month later, it says, "Your neighbor knows." So everybody's trying to figure out, oh man, now the neighbor knows. And then about a month later, they changed the billboard again. It says, "Everybody knows." So you're like, man, I feel like I'm the only one that doesn't know. And then they changed it and said, "Everybody knows that Toyotas are cheaper in Rome at such and such, Terry Reed's Toyota dealership." It was a car billboard place, but everybody had been talking about it. And I'm sure that there was some times of confession, some times of, there were probably some marriages ended over that whole situation with these billboards. But the truth is, no matter what it is that you're doing that you think is done in secret, like, hey, God knows. And imagine if everybody knew. So don't let it get to that point. But let's go ahead and keep going. Look at verses 19 and 20 in chapter 2 with me. Verses 19 and 20. It said, "I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord." So after there's been this time of like real consequences for Gomer's actions, she's going to get brought back in. And God is making the connection of, hey, his people have been unfaithful to him. And there's going to be consequences for that. There's going to be even some judgment for that. But God is still going to bring his people back to himself. He's going to still make that relationship right with himself. The word for that, a good word, is reconciled. That relationship being made right. God says, I'm going to bring my people back to me after all this. I'm going to practice forgiveness. I'm going to love them the way that a wife loves her husband. So it almost kind of sounds like New Testament stuff right here. It really kind of sounds like the prodigal son. It says, being clothed with righteousness and acceptance, and in the way that Christ, that God looks at us, seeing the righteousness of Christ for those of us who are believers. So let's skip ahead to chapter 3 of Hosea, just the first 3 verses. "The Lord said to me, go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and she is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turned to other gods and loved the sacred raisin cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and lethal of barley. Then I told her, you're to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any other man, and I will behave the same way towards you." Now, If you're wondering about the whole raisin cakes thing, that was because they didn't have chocolate back then. That was like the most indulgent sweet thing they had, were these like pressed bars of raisins and figs. But it became it was almost synonymous with pagan worship in these like temples of fertility gods, as they would eat this very, very indulgent, luxurious dessert type food, and then worship all these pagan gods. And God is saying, Gomer, these other people, they have deserted me and gone and tried to take and enjoy all that the rest of the world has to offer. That's what's going on with the raisin cakes there. But she had gotten herself broke to the point that she had sold herself into slavery to pay off her debts. That's something you could do back then. And this parallels, once again, with the prodigal son. Remember, he's basically working for nothing, broke, in debt, in a very bad place. And so what happens is Hosea comes down there, and he buys back Gomer. He purchases her freedom. And so our unfaithfulness, in a similar way, our unfaithfulness continues to be costly. And even though Gomer did not have to pay for it, somebody did. And I don't want people to be, feeling bad about this necessarily, but it is good to remember every once in a while that the salvation that has been offered to us, the freedom that has been offered to us, it is not free. It may be free to us, but it was not free to Jesus. It was very costly to Jesus. It's good to be reminded of that sometimes. I vividly remember the first time I ever bought somebody a present with my own money. Maybe you remember this as well. Maybe you've been there. But I remember I had an allowance, not a lot of money, but I had an allowance, and I had saved up. And for Christmas one year, I was going to buy a couple people a present. I bought my brother an RC car from Radio Shack, which is about the most 90s sentence I could possibly say. But I bought him an RC car from Radio Shack for like $15. And I remember I had the box, and I was starting to wrap it up, and my mom stopped me. She's like, "Hey, you need to take the price tag off before you wrap it up." And I was like, "Why would I do that?" She's like, "Well, you don't want people to know what you paid for it, right? Like, that's rude." And I was like, "Yeah, I do want them to know how much I paid. That was a lot of money, right? Like, it's $15." Turns out that's rude. But in the same kind of way, like, we should hopefully never get to a spot where even if you've been a Christian for a long time, you've been saved a long time, we don't pay Jesus back. That's not how this works. But it is good to be reminded of, oh yeah, that was costly. And maybe that leads to an attitude of gratitude towards Christ for that. But even that being said, I know many of us, we feel very distant. We feel very like we're not able to bring ourselves back. Even for those of us who would identify as Christians, and we think we're believers in Christ and we're good in that way, it still feels like, man, God is so far away right now, and I've done some really crappy things to get in the position that I'm in. We're never that far gone. Like, Hosea had to go somewhere. He went somewhere, paid, and brought her back. And in the same kind of way, like, Christ pursued us. Even when we were still sinners, not surprised by anything that we had ever done, he made that payment for us. And so, 2 Timothy 2:3, Pastor Chris read it today. It says, when we are faithless, he remains faithful. So our promises, Jesus' promises towards us are not built upon our ability to live up to the end of the bargain. His faithfulness is not based upon our faithfulness. God's love for you is not based upon your ability to be faithful in loving him back. His character, is the basis for his faithfulness. And the cost of being brought back into right relationship, being reconciled, he's the one who pays for that. Because if you're saying, well, I can't pay for that, he's the one that pays for that by sending his son Jesus to die on the cross for us. And we put those sins on his back, and he brings us back. So yes, are there consequences for sin? Yes, and sometimes we're going to bear the scars of that, the experience of that. But no matter how far away you are today, if you're feeling really distant, God can forgive you, and He wants to do that. So I pray that that's comforting for some of you guys today, just because I have a feeling that some of us are, maybe feeling like as we are coming out of, hopefully, this pandemic season, some of us have really gotten closer to God, and some of us have sort of drifted. You're not too far gone, but we want to help you through that. Anyway, hope you guys have some great discussion tonight. If you're watching this on IGTV this week, share it with your friends, maybe somebody that you think that would be helpful. But we love you all. Hope you have a great day.